Good evening, everyone. This is Mark Hamby here at Lamplighter Ministries, and I have with me a guest tonight, Mr. Paul McCusker. Some of you have heard the name Paul McCusker. I'm sure if you've ever listened to Adventures in Odyssey or radio theater over the last 30-plus years, you have heard written by, produced by, directed by Mr. Paul McCusker. Paul, it's a delight and an honor to have you here with us tonight.
It's great to be with you. Thank you.
So several years ago, I think I wrote to you, maybe 4 years ago, 3 years ago, I wrote to you and said, would you be willing to teach at the Guild? Do you remember that?
I do.
Uh-oh, we're locked up.
Did I lose you?
I'm having a little bit of a pause here, so I'm wondering.
Yes, you're actually freezing up, and I'm cutting out.
Okay,
I'm
same
sorry.
here. Same here with you. Carrie, how's it look? Things look good, Carrie, on your end? Well, we'll keep trying it, Paul, and see if it.
Yeah, sorry, it might be a little delay.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, it's still glitching just a little bit, but I'm trying to make sure I have everything turned off, so there shouldn't be any interference.
So, I asked you about 4 years ago if you could teach at the Guild, and you graciously told me that you were busy, had other things going on, and then I asked you the next year, and the next year, and finally this year, when I received your email, I had to laugh.
Yeah, I thought.
I think you said something like,
I was feeling a bit guilty by this time. I figure 3 strikes, I ought to be out, so I better say yes before you realize that and never ask me again.
Well, you have been a household name in my home. Tell us a little bit about all the things that God has allowed you to do over the course of these last. Has it been 30-plus years?
Yeah, actually, I came on. I was thinking about this the other day. I started freelancing for Focus on the Family in October 1986, and so yeah, and then it was shortly after, about a year and a half later, when they started Adventures in Odyssey and it was going into regular production, that I went on staff. Now,
were you one of the original creators of Odyssey in the very early stages?
Well, I'm hesitant to say that specifically. I mean, I'll be the first to give credit to Phil Lawler and Steve Harris, who created Odyssey at the most foundational level. I mean, everything we sort of took on and created was built on the foundation that they established with Wit, the town of Odyssey, Wit's End, all of those things that were formative to those of us who came even briefly afterwards. They already had a number of things in place that we were fortunate enough and blessed enough to build on. So while I did create things for the show, the foundation definitely came from Phil and Steve.
Do you know how many you have written over the course of the years?
You know, every now and again I'll ask Nathan Hubler, who is the guru of all things Odyssey. He sort of knows everything. And I think somewhere around 300, maybe more than that. And it's the question of the ones I wrote alone and those that I co-wrote, and then those that I worked on behind the scenes but didn't necessarily have my name on. But I think he said around 300.
I know that the audience that's listening right now wants to ask, what was your favorite?
You know, with 300 of them, I'm fortunate enough to even be able to remember some of them, let alone think of the favorite. I don't know, because with a show that's been on as long as Adventures in Odyssey, you have different seasons in essence. I mean, it's like any long-running show where you have characters coming and going, you have transitions into other story ideas and story arcs, and all of them within those, I always had favorite episodes, favorite characters that I was dealing with. But it is honestly like trying to pick among your children. I'm hesitant to call writing and my projects children because it's dangerous, but it is. It's actually easier for me to tell you the ones that I don't necessarily like that I wrote, or that didn't turn out the way that I'd hoped that they would. Somehow those come quicker to mind than the ones that I like the most.
Well, that's actually a good segue into this question. So one of the reasons that I wanted you here at the Guild is because you have many years of experience. You've been a writer, director, producer for many years. What does it take to become a writer? Some people think they have the ability to write, but what prepared you the most to do what you do?
Well, I think it's a couple of things without sounding formulaic. One is, of course, tenacity. And that's true for anything that you aspire to do. You have to be tenacious with it. You have to be, just determined that you are going to explore it as far as it'll go. And if, for various reasons, you realize that, you don't have the interest that you thought you did because the work got really hard and laborious and fatiguing, or that you weren't interested or didn't enjoy it as much, or for some people it's realizing that there's a limitation to the amount of talent they have to do it. Then there's a point where you say, well, it might be time to stop and move on to something else and find out what God wants me to do and focus my attention on that. But really it's kind of time, tenacity, and talent. See, now I've made it alliterated, so I guess that's good. More than anything. And I guess it's really that sense of exploration. You start with the feeling that you want to do this, and you want to pursue it and get good at it, and explore it. And I think a lot of the writers that I know would probably admit the same thing, that even now, after all these years, I'm still exploring. I'm still exploring what it is to be a writer, what kinds of writing I like to do. Am I actually getting better at it? All of those questions stay with me all the time.
Were there any books over the last 30 years that you would say, 1, 2, 3, 4 books that you can think of that would be the most influential in your life?
That's an excellent question. In terms of how-to books, I can't really point to very many. There were a couple of more obscure books that I picked up while I was in England that were talked about writing specifically for like radio and writing in general. Stephen King did a book that I'm reticent to recommend because it's Stephen King, but at the same time, this is a man who knows a lot about writing. Jerry Jenkins, of course, who co-wrote the Left Behind series, has done a book that I think is very good. A lot of those came later in life. For me, to be honest, it wasn't so much how-to books as it would be novels, films, plays that inspired me, that I would read or I'd watch and say, that's what I aspire to do, that's what I want to do. And so that's the how-to books. They always change and shift from generation to generation, or every decade you have sort of a new one with a new technique. But the essence of the writing, I think, is the same as it's always been. So read Shakespeare, see Shakespeare, and watch the stuff and read the stuff that inspires you. That would be a big thing, because that's really all that worked for me.
Yeah, I remember meeting John RhysDavies for the first time, and he quoted Shakespeare the entire time I was with him. I remember I was in a meeting with Disney World executives, and Warner Brothers was there, and Fox was there. Not Warner, it was Paramount. And Mom in the crowd was looking for a job for preparation for her son to become a great film producer, film director. And she asked the question. She was so anxious, she finally got her question in front of everybody else before the time was ready to ask the questions, but she wanted to make sure she got the question in. And she said, what can my 22-year-old son do to prepare to become a great film director? And the three of them looked at each other, and the guy at Disney went first. And he said, have him study philosophy. And then the guy at Fox looked at her and said, have him study theology. And I thought, wow, that was great insight.
Yeah, and that's the thing, because even when we talk about writing, I mean, when we talk about the how-to side of it, that's the craft. That's the craft of well, how to construct a good sentence, or what makes for compelling reading, or what makes for something that's compelling to watch. The craft side of it is one thing. That's information. It's the inspiration side that I think is huge, and that's what I think they're talking about. That philosophy, theology, to be well read in other things fills the well, and that's what I've always found. That very often it's when I'm reading something or engaged in something that really has nothing to do with me as a writer or with my writing, then I'll draw inspiration, and I'll draw something that inevitably will come back into the writing, sometimes consciously and sometimes even subconsciously.
Seems to be an accumulated effect of knowledge, and I think that's one of the things I think students are missing today. I think they're not well-rounded. I don't think they've been tenacious even in the preparation as far as the foundational things of grammar and writing. Is there any, would you encourage people to get a college degree? Would you encourage them to go to seminars? What are some of the preparations they can be involved in?
Well, I think all the above. When I was in college, I majored in journalism because I wanted to be a working writer, and that was a key thing for me. I thought if I majored in English, I would wind up being a wannabe writer. I'd be teaching, and so busy teaching that manuscript that I have tucked in the drawer somewhere never gets looked at, never gets written. And so I majored in journalism because I wanted to work at the craft, and I thought that's a good way to learn how to do it. But while I was in college, I think I took maybe one writing course, which was not, I mean, it was helpful a bit, but not hugely helpful. Most of it for me is picking up from reading, watching, listening, and then what you said, going to the seminars, and I've been to one or two that I thought was hugely helpful. I wouldn't speak against college, because the other thing that college gives you is your tent making. It gives you that thing that maybe you should be learning to do while you're trying to make it as a writer. I wound up doing a lot of copywriting, and that actually paid the bills. Doing copywriting as in writing back cover copy and catalog copy and just doing that level of grunt work. And I hesitate to even call it that, because there's a great discipline to that helped pay the bills while I was trying to write the other stuff that I wanted to write. And that was huge for me. But so yeah, college is beneficial in that. And yes, well, I would think the Guild. I would think there are a lot of places you want to go to be informed and inspired, and you want to find out what the best ones are, so that you have good takeaway. That when you leave, you not only feel like you know how to do what you're doing better, but now you're even more inspired by it. You feel quickened, in your spirit to want to do more.
You use the word discipline, and I think that's an area that young people today, as well as parents, need to realize that you get what you put into something, and there needs to be some serious self. We were talking this morning in devotions. An athlete, an Olympic athlete, the preparation. They're up at 4 o'clock in the morning. Beethoven said he would spend as much as 65 different revisions just on one section of his music, before he was willing to. This is it, I very seldom come across someone who is a gifted writer, and I think people have talents that need to be cultivated, and you have to work hard at it. And simple things like grammar and spelling and just putting good sentence structure together is where they need to start.
Right. And the danger.
Okay, so
I was going to say the danger too is because of social networking, and because of all of the shortcuts to writing, that's texting and those sorts of things. People think then that the shortcuts apply to every discipline. Well, the truth is they don't. There are no shortcuts to being a good writer or to being a great writer. It does come from time. It comes from practice. It comes from all the things that, as you say, would apply to an athletic skill. And it should almost look invisible. I mean, we all know that the great writers, you read it and it seems so effortless that you think, oh, well, they just must have been born doing this, and you don't know all the hours that went into crafting what it is that they've written, or all the hours that went into. I mean, Jerry Jenkins will be the first to admit that he's kind of an interesting example, because suddenly after 30 years of writing, he then hits it with Left Behind, and everybody's aware of him. But he had been writing for 30 years before that. And he is still a very disciplined writer. He works at his craft all the time. And it's true for all of us. And I have to keep doing it every day, every minute.
Now, I remember listening to a seminar by Jim Collins, who wrote Good to Great. Previous to that, he wrote Built to Last. And before he wrote Built to Last and Good to Great, he used to have this pile of books on his desk. And he had this beautiful leather chair behind his desk. He made this beautiful room. It was going to be his reading room, and in the back wall he also had a large screen TV. And every Monday, he'd open the book, but that Monday Night Football would come on. The next thing he knew, he never opened the book, and that went on for years. He said years, and then one day he came in and he said, "That's it. The TV's gone, the clicker's gone," and he said from that moment onward, he was able to stay focused on his writing and his reading, and that's what eventually allowed him to write those two amazing books.
Well, right, and you touch on the whole importance of environment. I mean, very often, and I've seen this, in fact, it's almost a joke, there are some people who think that they have to go to the library or go out into the mountains to write. They have to go someplace reclusive. And then they can't write, and they're not sure why they can't. Well, it may be that they're wired like I am, and I tend to do a lot of my writing in public places. I go to, a Panera Bread or Starbucks or some bar place with a cafe, sitting with my laptop, because the energy of the people around me, the hustle and the bustle, is not really distracting. In fact, I find it very easy to tune out. And yet somehow the human dynamic of being around people is stimulating and inspiring to me. Now, there are other people who do have to kind of hide away. They've got to find an environment where it's very quiet or whatever. So that's a key thing. If you're going to write, you want to figure out what's the best environment for you to write in, and find that environment and use it. See, so the example you gave is perfect for that. Get rid of the distractions. Get rid of the things that will help you procrastinate.
That's amazing. I never thought of this before. When I'm writing for like a research paper, I write my best on an airplane. I'm locked in. There's no cell phone. There's no emails, and I can write for hours on an airplane. One time, the plane landed. I'm still writing. I didn't even notice the people getting off the plane. Finally, they had to come back and say, "So you got to get off the plane."
Yeah.
And I haven't finished yet. But then writing. I do best at Starbucks or a cafe, because I same with you. I pull that energy in from the people around me. Isn't that something? I never thought of that before.
I did read an article about that wanted to help people like us say you're not really as crazy as you may think, because the cliche of the writer is to hide somewhere and lock away in some remote place. And yet there's a whole bunch of us who are stimulated by being in a public place and doing it on a plane or train or in a shop or in a cafe. I'm far more productive with the energy of people around me than I am. If I'm left to my own resources, I'm actually a horrible procrastinator. So I've always got something else that I could do if given the chance.
So I'm going to just divert just slightly, and then we're going to come back. But I just feel compelled to ask this. Okay, so you and I have lived a large part of our lives, and God is blessed. If what do you look as you look back on your life? What has made the man? What has made Paul McCusker more than anything else? I don't know that I've ever been asked that question before, and that's a very good question. I mean, the easy answer would be relationship with God, Holy Spirit, and that sounds like an easy answer, though harder to live out. So I'd have to qualify that. I know I've been shaped by the people around me, people I've worked with. I've had the honor to work with over the years, very creative people, people who have fed into my lives.
There have been pastors. There have been a number of people who in the bumper car of life, as you're bumping and making your mistakes and you're learning and you're moving through life, they're part of that. They're part of the ones that I bumped into and they sent me back into the right direction. Or so really it's the love of God and the love of people have probably shaped that. And everything from my family and wife and children and my mom and brothers and immediate family all the way out then to the co-workers and friends who have been as close as family to me over the years. I can't underestimate the influence of the people on me in everything that I've been doing and the way I am. For better or for worse. I could be an example, but a bad one, but that's for other people to decide, I think.
That's great. And I like what you said, the love of God and the love of people. It really comes down to those last two commandments, doesn't it? Love God and love others as yourself. And I think that's, if that isn't happening in us, if we're not being shaped into that loving relationship with people, because I'm more of I want to get it done, and I tend to push people and other people. And Mark, you're going to get more out of people by loving them and encouraging them than pushing them. Okay, that brings me to this amazing moment that I had. So my favorite moment with Paul McCusker, and I had many, but I do have a favorite. We're on the phone, and I'm telling you about, that I want to have kind of an ecclesiastical direction where, we're learning about God, we're learning about truth from under heaven and under the sun, and we're learning about, partnering with God, having a partnership with the divine, a divine partnership as we influence our students here. And then you said something to me. You quoted a verse from the Psalms. And when you did that, I've read that Psalm at least 100 times, at least, but I never heard it the way you quoted it. Can you just relive that moment, and then let's unpack that verse?
Well, and yeah, you and I were talking about it, and I even wrote down, I found my notes from it, and you had talked about how what you aspired for the guild is for the students to, I wrote down, touch the divine, and make every word count, and all of that. And it reminded me, actually, I wish I could take credit for finding the verse, but it was a friend of mine, a former co-worker, Kurt Bruner, who actually used the verse in a devotion he gave at Focus on the Family one day. And it's from Psalm 45. And the full verse, it was, my heart overflows with a godly theme. I address my verses to the king. My tongue is like the pen of a ready scribe. Now, when Kurt read that, he said there was one translation that basically said, I am the pen in the hand of a poet. And I'm not sure what that version was, but the heart of the verse rang true to me. I thought that's a beautiful idea, and I'd never seen it before as well. That I am the pen. My tongue is like the pen of a ready scribe. I am the pen, and I've looked at a variety of different translations of it, and they all do variations of the same idea, which is I am the tool. I am the pen in the hand of a ready scribe, but of the great poet, and of course that great poet being God. And that stayed in my mind for years. I mean, I heard this, he probably said this 20 years ago, and I find myself going back to it, to be used by God, but to be used in a participatory manner, that he is using me in order to get these words out, in order to speak poetry, beauty, all the things that we aspire to do.
Wow, that just, I just keep thinking about it, that we are the pen, and a pen in the hand of the poet. Oh, that's just, that blows me away just to even think about it. It really fits so well with the theme of the Guild this year, of having a divine partnership. I love what Second Peter says. That He's given us everything we need for life and godliness, according to a full, intimate knowledge of Him who's called us to His own glory and excellence.
Mm-hmm.
He's given us great and magnificent promises.
Mm-hmm.
Through these, we might become partners in His divine nature.
Mm-hmm.
And wow, that's pretty amazing to be able to be. Now, what's interesting, and I love John Fornoff when he says things like this, that God wants to help us to write the next chapter in our story. And a lot of people tend to close the book, and they don't want the next chapter to be written because they've gone through some type of difficulty, and they might be afraid or they're fleeing. What would you say to people state right now where they're afraid of what the next chapter is going to look like?
Well, I think it's funny because I think there's two motivations on wanting to quick freeze the moment, to stop. It's like Mount of Transfiguration where Peter said, hey, let's stop and build booths and let's kind of place ourselves here. Let's stay in the moment. And of course, they didn't. In fact, Jesus took them back down the mountain, and the very first thing they encountered was a difficulty they hadn't encountered before. So the mountaintop experience is one reason why some of us might hesitate to go into the next chapter, because we're thinking, well, it can't get better than this. Or as you say, they've gone through a difficulty, and both are true. But what we have to remember as we go into the next chapter is that God is already there. This participation we have with Him, the thing that took us into a low that we may be learning from, painful as it may be, and then may take us to the next mountain. And then we've got mountains and valleys, what C.S. Lewis called the law of undulation, where we kind of are up and down, and this is the nature of our being. But when we hit the end of one chapter, for whatever fear, anxiety, it's not going to be as good or it might be worse, God is already there. And if our hearts are with Him, if our hearts are in the journey and on the journey with Him, just like the disciples with Jesus, then fear is not of God. There's healthy respect, and there are a lot of things, and there's healthy fear, as in don't put your hand in the fire, or don't go to that part of town after midnight, whatever it is. Those are healthy things. But fear does not come from God in the way that I think we experience it when we are afraid of the next moment. But God is there, and if we trust God, then we take that step into the next moment, into the next chapter. And as John would say, and as you said, and we are writing it with Him. We are participating in that and writing it with Him. We are the pen in His hands.
That's beautiful. I love what I love about these webinars and talking with the masters is that there's something always said that's just so powerful. And when you just said God's already in, picture turning the page, and you don't know what to expect, but God's already there. That's amazing. And there may be folks listening to right now that maybe they're going through an extreme trial where they just don't know what God's going to do next, or they don't know what's going to happen next with their relationship with their spouse or a child. And God's in the next chapter. I love that.
Well, and let's remember, as writers and as people who want to write, there is no tragedy so great that we will not use it in our writing. as many writers have told me, there's always that part of us that's standing apart from whatever the difficulty is, thinking, oh, I could use that somewhere. Let me just get that down. And that's why journaling is important. That's why many writers talk about writing as cathartic and as therapeutic. And even if it's never shows up in the most overt way, it's always a good thing. I think that's something that writers will always have, is a certain engagement detachment, that part of you that's watching and taking notes, even while you're going through what could be the worst experience of your life. And I think at the heart of that is because in God's economy, nothing is wasted. No experience, there's nothing wasted. Scraps of ideas that I may have written down. I've got a notebook. I mean, I keep kind of a notebook, right? And I've got tons of scribbles and all kinds of things in it. Ideas from 35, 40 years ago. And I will pull the thing out, and there are ideas that I've had that I thought that's a waste of time. Why even bother with it? And then, sure enough, 30 years later, I'm working on the idea. I'm working in crafting it into a story.
Yep.
So I think it works as writers. Nothing is wasted. So that's why you always want to keep writing things down and never throw them away. But in life, nothing is wasted. There is nothing in our lives that God allows to come in as a waste of time for us. I mean, everything is an opportunity to learn, to grow, to trust Him more, to grow closer to Him. And that's also been a driver for me. Even when it feels like a waste, even when we can't see the redemption, obviously to us, our trust in God is that ultimately it will, whether in this lifetime or the next, but at some point it is usable. And I don't mean utilitarian, I just mean in the way God works.
That's beautiful. I do the same thing. I have notebooks and notebooks of ideas, of things that I will hear on the radio, or something will just come into my mind. The Holy Spirit will place something there, and I have to write it down. I'll even do vocabulary words. If I come across a new vocabulary word, I'll write that down, look up the definition, and I'll put it in my book. And it's just, to learn new words, I think is something that is a lost art as well. That's why I love reading our old books, these books written in the 18th and 19th centuries. You come across those words you've never seen before, and I write them down, and then I try to use them in my writing. And it's just kind of a creative bent. But Paul, as we're coming to a close here, you've never been to the Guild before. You don't know quite what to expect, and we talked previously about how we want every word to be important. I want students to come seeing the power of words that can just think of, and we're not going to get into this tonight, but can you imagine if our political figures had, but we won't talk about that tonight.
Yeah, better not to.
But and it's so lacking today. But we talked about when students get here, we want them to have an experience like the woman had when she touched the hem of Jesus' garment, and Jesus said, "Who touched me?" I want the students to learn through you, through John, through our masters here. I want them to learn that God has given us these gifts to be able to reach back and touch Him so that God can be moved. Paul, I want to write so that God is moved by our writing. That it moves His emotions and His own heart, thinking like, that's, when it says sing a new song, I want to sing it. I want to write something that's never been written before, sing something that's never been sung before, play something that's never been played before, build something that's never been built before, so that God looks down and says, wow, that is amazing. So, with that idea, you coming to the Guild for the first time, what would you like, and I know there's things that you're not even aware of that are going to take place here, but what would you like to see take place in the lives of the students while you're here?
Well, I think as you and I talked before, there are a couple of things. One is a renewed appreciation for God. I keep thinking, Dorothy Sayers, the writer, pointed out that before we know anything about God in Scripture, before we call Him King, Father, all the different titles that we give to Him, the first thing we understand from Genesis is that He's a creator. That's our first exposure to God. He is a creator, and then He's instilled that in us, and that He is creating through us, and continuing His work in active creation. And I'd love for us to feel inspired in that. And I think inspiration is a big part of it. We can go over, and we'll go over, a lot of information and how to do it better, and hopefully be inspired to be excellent in what we do. That good enough is never good enough, if you know what I mean. And to learn that is hard, because being better than good enough is very hard work. But I think information and inspiration, if we can combine those, intertwine them in a way that we all benefit from it. And I think the pool of ideas, the energy and creativity at something like this is going to inform and inspire me. So I'm not completely altruistic about this. I'm also coming in believing in what my takeaway will be. And I don't mean selfishly. I mean in the sense of being around enthusiastic people who want to learn and want to be inspired and are going to work to do that, I think it's just going to be great for all of us.
And if you could just see the preparations that we've got going on, you do this. We had this 1853 classic Gothic church building. Michael Card was here this past Christmas and did 2 concerts in there, just standing room only. And we had this huge organ that was built in 1853, built by one man. It's enormous. It's about 25 feet high, with all of the big musical pipes in it. And then inside it is this 9-foot by 12-foot room that had all of the pipes and the big bellows and all of this stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it was compact. So I finally traced down who made the organ, and it was this, and we got a hold of the great grandson of the original builder from 1853.
Wow. And
this man still owns the organ. It's a organ making company.
Ah.
And so we showed a video of the organ and all the parts and the moving parts, and we're trying to get the thing working again. And we got some sound out of it, but it wasn't quite in tune. And so he goes, I can fix this for you. He goes, we have the ability to make this thing just like it was in 1853. And I said, really? And he said, yeah. I said, what would be the cost? And he said, well, we're probably looking at a $200,000 minimum just to get started. I said, thank you very much. I know what we're going to do with the organ. so the organ, the very next day, the organ was gone. And today, inside that cavity of that organ, the facade of the organ is still there. It still looks like this huge organ. But behind it, it is now a recording studio. And we are so excited. When everyone gets here, they're not going to even know. Well, they're going to hear it on this webinar. But talk about creativity. We're the only studio in the world that has a recording studio in the bowels of an organ.
That's wonderful. That's funny. So, yeah, it's almost like a spy adventure, where you move that organ in order to get back into the into these secret compartments in the old buildings. It's wonderful. That's great.
So I think with you coming and John, and we've got Sarah Groves is going to be here. We've got Buddy Green is going to be here. Jeff Taylor, John Dorick, Patrick Powell, Kim Whining Photography. We've got the legendary Bob Garner from Disney is going to be here for filmmaking. God has brought together an amazing team this year, and we're very, very excited, and there's a lot going on here in the preparation for it. So, Paul, I just want to just give this opportunity. Now, you're not going to be able to hear this, but I'm watching this webinar. I imagine quite a few. But I would just say this. My children are now in their 30s, 32, 34, 36 years of age. Mm-hmm. And the one name that if I said to them, I'm talking to Paul McCusker tonight, they would say, really? Paul McCusker? You became a household name. Mm. And we just, at this moment, if everybody, if you could hear everybody, Paul, at this moment, you would be receiving a standing ovation. And I think I can say this on behalf of everyone, we want to thank you for all that you gave to us and our children. God used you to help shape the character of our children over the last 30 years. Thank you so much.
Well, you're very kind, and I'm grateful to God for the opportunity to work with so many wonderful people to be able to do it. So I thank you.
So, ladies and gentlemen, I will say, and I'm sure Paul will not even want me to say this, but the legendary Paul McCusker, thank you so much, and God bless you, and God bless you all for attending.
Thank you. We'll see you in a couple of months.
Yeah. Thanks, Paul.